This is an overview of the Apple iPad version 1.
And here it is up close. So as I said, this is version 1 of the iPad, as opposed to version 2. It was launched in May 2010, so it's been around for just over a year now. Now, this is the Wi-Fi and 3G version. There's also a Wi-Fi only one, and obviously if it is Wi-Fi only, it is slightly cheaper, but as a result you sacrifice in really portability and being able to use it in any location if you just get the Wi-Fi only version. The width and height of the iPad is 9.5 by 7.5 inches, so typically it's smaller than an A4 sheet of paper. The depth of the iPad, as you can see here, it's half an inch, so it's just a little over 1 centimetre, so it's not very thick. In terms of weight, it's around about half to 2/3 the weight of a typical netbook, so you're talking 680 grams.
Apple have obviously spent a lot of time and effort thinking about creating a very usable device. There aren't very many buttons to it. With the black rim around the edge, it means it's easy to hold in your hands with your thumbs resting on the side without actually having to touch the view screen itself. You have the button at the bottom here, brings the device immediately to life from standby mode. On the side, it's worth pointing out you've got a screen lock button here, so you can lock the screen in either horizontal or vertical mode, which is particularly useful.
From being completely powered down, it takes about 15 seconds to turn on the iPad for the first time, but once it's in standby mode, pressing this button immediately brings it to life, and then sliding the switch at the bottom immediately brings up all your applications. Battery life is about 10 to 11 hours, which is superb. Depending on use, it means you're going to probably charge this once every few days or so. The screen display itself is 1024 by 768. As you can see, it is a glossy screen, but this doesn't cause a problem whatsoever, typically because when you're holding it, it's right in front of you and you can't really tell any reflections. The brightness and the contrast levels of the screen is excellent though, and it's a really clear display. In terms of everyday use of the iPad, thanks to the Apple App Store, you've got access to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of different applications. You're always going to find an application that you're going to find useful. Bear in mind that when you first do end up buying one of these, Apple pretty quickly asks for your credit card details, and it's pretty quick and easy to unknowingly rack up quite a high bill paying for expensive applications that you're not necessarily going to use very often, so it's worth just keeping tabs on what applications you end up buying. Web browsing is done using their integrated browser, which is Safari, and web browsing is really simple and easy to do. It's very, very fast to scroll up and down through websites. Zooming in on text as well is very, very fast. The iPad itself uses an A4 processor, which has no problems at all with web browsing. I've noticed that when I use my iPhone, web browsing can be a bit more slow and jerky. You don't really get that at all with an iPad. Web browsing is far, far smoother to do. There are a couple of drawbacks though. Firstly, iPads do not come with Flash enabled, which is pretty frustrating because lots of websites use Flash for video, for example, and as Flash is enabled, it means you're not going to actually necessarily get access to all the content that websites have to offer. Other tablets though, made by other manufacturers, do have Flash enabled, but it's worth pointing out that the iPad doesn't. In terms of typing on an iPad, it's pretty simple and straightforward to do using the overlay keyboard you get at the bottom, either in portrait mode or in landscape mode, and typing is pretty simple. It is fine. You end up using most of your fingers, but I don't think you use it quite as easily as if you had a full-size keyboard, for example. I would say that typing on an iPad is fine for things like replying to emails, writing short amounts of text. If you wanted to do quite a lot of word processing, for example, I think you're going to get a bit fed up using this keyboard, and you'd probably want to end up buying a keyboard which you can actually plug into the iPad instead.
In terms of whether it's better to get the Wi-Fi only iPad or the Wi-Fi and 3G one, I guess a lot of it depends upon how you're going to use it. If it's just going to be at home, you might as well just get the Wi-Fi version, whereas if you think you might use the iPad in other locations, then definitely get the 3G version. The 3G version is slightly more expensive, and there is a cost implication because you're going to need to buy a 3G SIM card. But probably the cheapest way to go about doing this at the moment is to buy a pay-as-you-go SIM, and you're typically looking at spending around about £7 a month for about 1 GB of data allowance. There is a newer version of the iPad 2, which was launched earlier on this year. It is a slightly thinner design, and it also has an A5 chip inside it as opposed to the A4 chip. I think though for generic web browsing you're probably not going to notice any discernible difference. It also has front and rear facing cameras, and that means you're going to be able to take pictures with the iPad 2. And you're also going to be able to use the FaceTime application, which is for face-to-face video conferencing. But as a result of this latest version which has been released, the iPad version 1 is now slightly cheaper. In terms of price, the iPad version 1 costs around about £300 to £350 for the 16GB Wi-Fi only version, and that will spiral up until about £550 for the 64GB 3G version. The iPad version 2 is typically about £100 to £150 on top of the version 1 price. If it was me personally, I would probably go for the iPad version 1 because I don't necessarily think the differences are enough to warrant the extra cost. So that's my overview of the Apple iPad version 1. In conclusion, I think it's an excellent device. I think it's created a new way for people to use technology to go on the internet. It's very light, it's very easy to carry around with you, so it's very portable. The battery life is 10 to 11 hours, which is excellent. And for simple web browsing, I think the iPad is hard to beat. It's not a laptop replacement, however. I think typing on the iPad, although it's fine, I think for intense amounts of typing, like document writing for example, you're going to end up getting slightly frustrated with the keyboard. Although you can buy an external keyboard to plug into it. There are a couple of other downsides. Firstly, the iPad doesn't have Flash enabled on it, which means you're not going to get access to all elements of certain websites. Secondly, it is quite a locked down device. You can't really use it to store files on, for example, so you can't really use the iPad as an external hard disk. But overall, I think it is a great device. And also with the introduction of the iPad version 2 this year, the price of the iPad version 1 has become more and more attractive. There we are, I hope you've enjoyed this overview of the iPad version 1, and if you'd like to check out some more reviews you can go to my YouTube channel, which is TechSaver UK. Thanks.